My parents erased me from their lives for 5 years because my sister told them I had dropped out of medical school. Last month, she showed up in my emergency room bleeding badly, and the trauma team called for the chief surgeon. The doors opened. My mother saw the name on my white coat. Her hand gripped my father's arms so tightly that he flinched. Growing up, my sister was always the brilliant one. Her name is Claire Bennett, and she could charm any adult in the room within minutes. My parents swallowed it all like dessert. I was the quiet kid with a science project and a second-place ribbon no one ever asked about. One weekend, I made it to the state science fair. That same weekend, Claire had a small role in a school play. Guess which event my parents said they absolutely couldn't miss? I stood next to my project table, scanning the room again and again, waiting for them to walk in. They never did. When I got accepted into medical school across the country, my father finally looked at me and said, "Maybe you'll actually make something of yourself." It wasn't love, but it felt like oxygen. Claire smiled too, but only with her mouth. After that, she started calling me more often. Asking about classes. Asking about professors. Asking about exam dates. I thought she cared. What I didn't realize was that I was giving her ammunition. During my 3rd year of medical school, my best friend Lily Carter was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. She didn't have family nearby, just me. The university approved a formal leave so I could take care of her for a semester. There were forms to sign and meetings with the school, but none of that mattered. Lily was terrified and she had no one else. So I stayed with her. I drove her to appointments, sat with her during treatments, slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed when the nights got bad. At some point, exhausted and overwhelmed, I made the mistake of calling Claire. Part of me hoped that for once she might just act like a normal sister. Her voice turned soft immediately. She said she understood. She said she was proud of me for helping Lily. She even promised she wouldn't tell Mom and Dad because they would only worry. I believed her. 3 days later my father called. His voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it. "Your sister told us everything." According to him, I had dropped out of school. Apparently, I had run off with someone. Apparently, I had thrown away my future. I tried to explain. I offered to send documents from the university. I told him he could call the dean himself if he wanted. He didn't let me finish. "Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth." Then he hung up. After that, my number stopped working for them. My calls went straight to voicemail. My messages were never answered. A week later my mother blocked me too. I sent them a letter trying to explain everything. It came back unopened. My mother's handwriting was on the envelope, like I was junk mail. Like I was something that could simply be returned to sender. Lily died that winter. I was the only person in the hospital room when the monitor finally went flat. The sound of that machine going silent stayed with me for a long time. After the nurses finished their work and the room emptied, I sat there alone for a while. Before everything happened, Lily had slipped a note inside my anatomy textbook. I didn't find it until weeks later. It only had one sentence written on it: "Finish. Don't let blood decide your worth." So I finished. I went back to medical school. I graduated. Then came residency. Long nights. Endless shifts. Years of learning how to stay calm while someone's life hung in the balance. Eventually I became a trauma surgeon. I got married. Her name is Caroline Hayes. She met me during my last year of residency and somehow decided I was worth keeping around even though I was exhausted most of the time. When we got married, I sent invitations to my parents in Hartford, Connecticut anyway. Part of me still hoped they would show up. Every envelope came back the same way. Unopened. Returned. Like the others. Like I had never existed. Years passed. And then last month, at 3:07 a.m., my pager went off. Severe car accident. Unstable vitals. Possible abdominal bleeding. The kind of case that wakes up the entire trauma team. I walked toward the nurse's station while pulling on my surgical cap. The admission chart was waiting on the counter. I picked it up and glanced at the name. Claire Bennett, my sister. For exactly 3 seconds, I didn't move. The hallway clock ticks loudly enough that you can hear every second. Tick, tick, tick. Then my feet started moving again. The chart looked like every trauma admission I had seen in the last 6 years. Name, age, blood type, mechanism of injury, female patient, 31 years old, severe internal bleeding. Her name was still there when I looked again. Dr. Hayes. The voice came from the other side of the desk. It was Maria Delgado, one of the triage nurses. She's already on the way 2 or 3. The team's waiting. I folded the chart and tucked it under my arm. I'm coming. For a moment, I considered stepping away. Technically, I could have declared a conflict of interest. Another surgeon could have taken the case. That would have been the safe option. The reasonable one. But abdominal hemorrhage doesn't wait while someone sorts out family history. So I pushed open the doors to operating room 3. The room was already prepared. Bright white lights. Cold air. Metal instruments arranged neatly on the tray. My team stood ready. Dr. Patel at anesthesia. Nurse Grant circulating. Ben at the instrument table. Chief surgeon in the room. Maria announced behind me. No one asked questions. After 6 years running trauma surgery, people learn not to waste time before an operation. I walked to the sink and began scrubbing my hands. 80 seconds. Counting each one. Water running over my knuckles, between my fingers, under my nails. I pulled on the gloves, adjusted my mask, then stepped up to the operating table. It was the first time I had seen my sister in 5 years. Bruises covered part of her forehead and neck. The oxygen mask hid half her face. The heart monitor beside her bed beeped unevenly. Her blood pressure was still dropping. I forced myself to look at the facts. Not my sister. Just the patient. Vitals on arrival? I asked. Dr. Patel answered without looking up. Blood pressure 84/50 when she came in. Now 78/48. Heart rate 118. Oxygen 91% with support. She paused briefly. Fast scan shows internal bleeding. Likely severe spleen injury. Blood transfusion already running. Good. All right, I said. Let's begin. The surgery lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. There was a moment, about halfway through, when her blood pressure dropped suddenly. The monitor started beeping faster, the sharp warning sound that every surgeon learns to recognize even in their sleep. Pressure falling, Dr. Patel said. Ben already had the instrument in his hand before I asked for it. Nurse Grant started calling out numbers every 30 seconds. The room moved with the kind of quiet coordination that only comes from years of working together. My hands didn't shake, not because I was brave, because they had been trained not to. 10 years of surgical training teaches your body something important, how to separate what you feel from what you. And if you don't want to wait for part 2, you can watch the full story on my YouTube channel. Just tap share, then more, and click the YouTube link here on my profile, or search for the channel Cooper Reddit on YouTube. What you feel from what you do. Clamp. Ben placed it into my hand instantly. Suction. Pressure stabilizing, Dr. Patel said a few seconds later. I exhaled once through my nose and kept working. By the time we closed the final incision, Claire was alive. Barely. But alive. I stripped off my gloves and stepped away from the table while the nurses transferred her toward recovery. "Nice save," Ben muttered quietly beside me. I gave a short nod. Then I walked out into the hallway. And froze. My parents were standing near the waiting area doors. My mother looked older. Smaller somehow. Her hair had more gray in it than I remembered. My father still stood stiffly with his hands folded like he was trying to maintain control over something that had already slipped away. The second my mother saw my face clearly, her hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the embroidery on my coat. Dr. Elias Hayes. Chief of Trauma Surgery. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother whispered, "Elias?" Hearing my name in her voice after 5 years felt strange. Like hearing a song you used to know by heart. "She's stable," I said professionally. The spleen ruptured. There was significant internal bleeding, but we controlled it. "She'll need monitoring for the next 24 hours. My mother blinked rapidly, tears already filling her eyes. Her voice cracked. "You're the chief surgeon?" I looked at her calmly. "Yes." My father finally found his voice. "Claire told us." "I know what Claire told you." Silence slammed into the hallway. Behind me, nurses moved through the corridor pushing equipment carts. Phones rang at the station nearby. Life continued around us while the 3 people who raised me stood there looking like ghosts. My mother stepped closer. "Elias, sweetheart, we didn't know." "You could have known." Her face crumpled instantly. "I tried to tell you," I continued quietly. "I called. I sent documents. I mailed letters. You sent them back unopened." My father's jaw tightened slightly, the way it always did when he realized he was wrong but hated admitting it. "We thought you'd thrown your life away," he said. "No," I replied. "You decided I had." Neither of them answered. For years, I used to imagine this moment. I imagined anger. Revenge. I imagined finally making them feel the same rejection they made me feel. But standing there in my blood-stained scrubs, exhausted after surgery, all I really felt was tired. My mother reached toward me hesitantly. "We missed so much. You chose to." That one landed. I saw it physically hit her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please don't do this." I almost laughed at the irony. "Don't do this." Like I was the one who erased a child. My pager buzzed again at my waist. Another trauma consult. Of course. The hospital never pauses for personal revelations. I glanced down at the screen, then back at them. "I have another patient." My father suddenly stepped forward. "Elias, wait." I stopped. For the first time in my entire life, my father looked uncertain around me. "We were wrong," he said quietly. The words should have meant everything. 5 years ago, they would have. Now they just sounded late. I nodded once. "I know." Then I turned to leave. "Elias," my mother called shakily. I looked back over my shoulder. Her voice broke completely when she asked, "Did you ever hate us?" The honest answer rose in my throat immediately. Yes. Yes, during the nights Lily was dying and I sat alone in that hospital room. Yes, when my wedding invitations came back unopened. Yes, every birthday that passed in silence. But hatred takes energy. And eventually, I had needed all my energy just to survive. So instead I said, "I stopped waiting for you." That hurt them more than yelling ever could. I walked away before either of them could answer. 3 days later, Claire woke up. I was reviewing scans at the nurse's station when Maria approached carefully. "She's asking for you." I kept signing the chart in front of me. "Is she medically stable?" "Yes." I closed the file. Room 814 was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Claire looked terrible. Bruising along her face. One arm in a cast. Oxygen tubing beneath her nose. But her eyes were open. When she saw me enter, she started crying immediately. "You really became a doctor," she whispered. I leaned against the doorway. "That tends to happen after graduating medical school." She flinched. "Good." For several seconds, she couldn't meet my eyes. Finally she whispered, "I didn't think they'd cut you off completely." I stared at her. "You told them I dropped out." "I know. You told them I ran away." Tears slid down her face. "I know." The monitor beside her beeped steadily between us. "Why?" I asked. Claire laughed weakly through tears, but there was nothing funny in it. "Because you were finally better than me." The honesty of it stunned me silent. She swallowed hard. "Do you know what it's like growing up with everyone praising you for being pretty and charming and talented, then suddenly your little brother becomes the impressive one?" I said nothing. "Mom and Dad worshipped success," she whispered. "And you were becoming successful in a way I couldn't compete with. You could have just gone to therapy like a normal person." A startled laugh escaped her despite herself. Then she cried harder. "I was jealous," she admitted. "And angry. And stupid. I thought if they were disappointed in you, then I'd still matter more." I looked at my sister for a very long time. The funny thing about resentment is that you imagine it coming from monsters. But most of the time, it comes from small, insecure people making selfish choices. "You don't get to blame insecurity for cruelty," I said finally. "I know. You let them bury me alive." Her face folded completely. "I know." For the first time in years, I believed she actually understood what she'd done. Not because she regretted getting caught. Because she finally saw the damage. Claire wiped at her eyes shakily. "I'm sorry, Elias." The room stayed quiet. Then I answered honestly. "I forgive you someday is possible," I said. "But it isn't today." She nodded like she deserved that. Maybe she did. I turned toward the door. "Elias?" I paused. Her voice came out small. "Did Lily really die?" The question punched through me unexpectedly. After all these years, hearing Lily's name aloud still hurt. "Yes," I said quietly. "She did." Claire covered her mouth and sobbed. And for the first time since I walked back into this hospital and saw my family again, I finally felt something break loose inside me too. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just grief. The kind that had been waiting years for permission to exist. Claire stayed in the hospital for another 8 days. During that time, my parents came every morning. At first, they hovered around me carefully, like people approaching a wounded animal they were afraid might bite. My mother kept trying to talk. My father kept trying to help in awkward practical ways that nobody asked for. Coffee left on my desk. A sandwich during a double shift. Quiet attempts at kindness from people who had once perfected the art of absence. I accepted none of it. Not cruelly. Just honestly. One evening, after finishing a 14-hour shift, I walked out to the parking garage and found my father waiting beside my car. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he held out a worn envelope. "I think this belongs to you." I frowned slightly and took it. The second I saw the handwriting, my chest tightened. My own. It was the letter I had mailed 5 years ago. The one they had returned unopened. The envelope was bent at the corners now, yellowed slightly with age. "I found it in your mother's dresser last week," my father admitted quietly. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. I stared at the envelope for a long moment. Still sealed. Still untouched. My father looked older than I had ever seen him. "When you were little," he said slowly, "you used to follow me around the garage while I worked on the car. You always asked questions. Hundreds of them." A faint, broken smile crossed his face. "I used to tell people you were going to be a scientist one day." I said nothing. He looked down at the concrete floor. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you clearly. That almost got me. Almost. Because part of me had waited my entire life to hear something like that. An acknowledgement. An apology. A confession that I had not imagined the neglect. But another part of me, the older, sharper part, understood something important now. An apology does not return stolen years." My father's voice roughened. "I failed you." The parking garage felt painfully quiet. Finally, I looked at him and asked the question that had lived inside me for years. "If Claire had never gotten hurt," I said softly, "would you ever have looked for me?" His silence answered first. And that was answer enough. His eyes filled afterward, but too late. Much too late. I nodded once and stepped around him toward my car. "Elias. I believe you're sorry," I said without turning around. "But you're apologizing because you found me again." I opened the car door. "You weren't looking when I was lost." Then I got in and drove home. Home. That word meant something different now. Not Hartford. Not the house I grew up in. Home was Caroline asleep on the couch waiting for me after midnight with a book falling out of her hands. Home was the terrible cooking we both pretended was acceptable because neither of us had energy after work. Home was the framed photograph from our wedding sitting near the hallway window. When I walked through the front door that night, Caroline looked up immediately. One glance at my face and she stood. "What happened?" I handed her the old unopened letter. She understood instantly. Caroline read the handwriting on the envelope, then looked back at me carefully. "You okay?" And that simple question nearly shattered me more than anything else had. Because she meant it. Not as obligation. Not out of guilt. Not because she was supposed to. She genuinely wanted to know. For years, I had been starving so badly for love that I mistook basic acknowledgement for affection. My parents taught me to beg for scraps. Caroline taught me what being chosen actually looked like. I sat down at the kitchen table and covered my eyes with one hand. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not quietly. Not politely. All of it came out at once. The grief over Lily. The loneliness. The rage. The humiliation of spending years wondering why I was never enough for the people who were supposed to love me automatically. Caroline never interrupted. She just held me through it. A month later, Claire was discharged from the hospital. Before she left, she asked to see me one final time. I almost declined. But eventually, I stepped into her room. She looked healthier now. Pale, but alive. Our parents sat quietly near the window. Claire held something in her lap. An old blue notebook. I recognized it immediately. My science journal from middle school. Every project idea. Every sketch. Every note. I thought it disappeared years ago. You kept this? I asked quietly. Claire nodded slowly. I stole it when we were kids. That tracked. She gave a weak smile through watery eyes. I used to read it when you were asleep. I frowned. Why? Because you were brilliant, she whispered. And I hated how much I admired you for it. The room went silent. Claire held the notebook out toward me. I think it always belonged to you. I took it carefully. My father suddenly spoke, voice thick with emotion. We can't change what we did. No, I agreed. My mother wiped at her eyes. But if there's any way to start over. I looked at the three of them. Then down at the notebook in my hands. For years, I thought closure would feel triumphant. Like winning. Like finally balancing the scales. But standing there, all I really understood was this. Some wounds heal. Some scars stay. And some relationships survive only if they're rebuilt completely differently than before. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. My mother nodded through tears. That's fair. It was the first fair thing any of us had said in years. I walked toward the door, then paused before leaving. One condition, I said without turning around. They waited silently. If we do this, if we try, I swallowed once. You don't get to pretend the last 5 years never happened. My father closed his eyes briefly and nodded. We won't. I finally looked back at them. Not with forgiveness. Not fully. But maybe with the possibility of it. And sometimes, after everything breaks apart, possibility is enough. 6 months later, I stood in a lecture hall filled with first-year surgical residents. I adjusted the microphone once and looked out across the room. Nervous faces. Exhausted faces. Ambitious faces. I remembered being one of them. At some point, I told them, this job will ask you who you are when things become painful. The room stayed silent. You will lose patience. You will lose sleep. Sometimes you'll lose people you love. My fingers brushed lightly against the folded note inside my coat pocket, Lily's note, carried with me every day. And during those moments, people will try to tell you what your worth is. I looked around the room carefully. Don't let them. After the lecture ended, residents slowly filtered out. One young woman lingered near the front. Dr. Hayes, she asked nervously. How did you keep going when things got hard? I smiled faintly. Because once upon a time, someone dying in a hospital bed had asked me to finish. And I had. You just take the next step, I told her. Then the next one after that. Outside the hospital windows, the city lights glowed against the darkening evening sky. And for the first time in a very long time, thinking about the future no longer hurt.